Hello everyone, Bag here. Hyacine is the next character on the docket for the first half of 3.3, so if you want to know how and where she can fit onto your account, then you've clicked on the right video. As always, before we get into the list proper, let's get into what she brings to and asks of a team. Hyacine, outside of her HP buffing niche, has a balancing act of fulfilling the typical role of a sustain on a team while playing into her own strengths. In order for her to fulfill her AoE damaging niche, she wants to have high uptime on her ultimate, as its 3-turn buff duration is what allows her member sprite, Little Ika, to launch an AoE attack after each of Hyacine's actions, including casting the ultimate itself. This ultimate buff is also what gives the team a large HP buff, so for the teams that care about that, her energy needs are the most pressing matter for her to solve. So then, she wants to be skilling as much as possible, as not only does this help her get closer to an 100% ultimate buff uptime, but her member sprite, Little Ika's damage, also scales off of it and Hyacine's healing. So if Hyacine is doing nothing but basic attacking to generate SP, which is the type of utility you would normally expect from a sustain, Ika's damage will be a lot weaker as a result. For HP scaling teams, this is not really an issue, as their carries use close to or just flat out 0 SP, making it very easy for Hyacine to perform optimally. But for everyone else, she is able to be flexible in providing damage and AoE hits, but there's a cost of either SP or damage when leaning too much into one niche over the other. This entire issue can also be solved through the enemies attacking her to give her energy, as enemies hitting Ika also give that energy to Hyacine. So this struggle can be solved depending on the fight, adding yet another layer of "it depends" into all of this. As you can see, she is a pretty complicated unit to gauge the utility of, so instead of dancing around specific use cases, let's just tackle units one by one to see where she fits into their meta teams. Timestamps are here as always for specific units if you want to jump around, as it might be obvious that we have a lot of different units to get through here. As our first example, let's look at Anaxa, a unit who can use Hyacine well, but not as a best in slot. While he appreciates her AoE hits, and she does also benefit from his damage bonus if he is played with another Evidition unit, raw damage alone can't replace the attack and energy that Ho-Ho can provide. This same line of thinking also goes for other energy-hungry units. Yunli, Argenti, Jingliu, and especially Aglaea can all make use of her damage to lower their required output to clear, but not only are they doing less damage without the occasional attack buff, but their important ultimate rotations that facilitate their entire game plan are ultra supported by Ho-Ho. For Jingliu and Aglaea specifically, where their ult rotations is directly tied to their functionality as a unit, I'll put them a tier below where they can work well, but something is missing. I'll also specifically note that Jingliu's HP drain does increase Ika's healing, which then slightly increases Hyacine's damage, but this does nothing to remedy what is lost on Jingliu's part by replacing Ho-Ho. The sus leaks claim that Jingliu will have some genuine HP scaling in her kit after her buffs, so maybe Hyacine will be genuinely good for her then, but for now, I'm just judging what's right in front of me. I'll also put Clara down here, as not only is Lynx generally desired for her taunt, but Ho-Ho also patches up her much more demanding energy needs when compared to Yunli. While we're on this roll, the Dot duo can also be below here, just because if you do want to make them work, you really should be running them with their best possible sustain, but this isn't that solid of an opinion until we get Kafka's buff. I'd also like to note Seele, since Hyacine's AoE hits can soften up enemies to make them easier to resurgence. I wouldn't say that they have amazing synergy together, considering most competitive Seele clears these days are sustainless, but if you have your E6 S5 Seele after she got added to the 50-50 loss banner, then Hyacine is for sure an option. For other general carries like Jing Yuan, Jade, or Mini Herta, who either use Ho-Ho or more so Aventurine, Hyacine is thoroughly usable, although again there is a trade-off between her personal damage and their damage amping. If you are generally wondering if Hyacine is worth pulling to support units like them, it's entirely a question of, do you already have premium sustains to use with them? If no, then she'll do about as good of a job as any other premium sustain. And if yes, then she really isn't an upgrade. Hyacine's strength is the ability to be a side grade or small downgrade in so many different teams while having her own very defined niche. So in the context of these generic carries, she is, say it with me now, good but not best in slot. I would also like to note, for the case of Mini Herta and Jade, their performance with either Hyacine or Aventurine as pseudo sub DPSs that can set up Herta follow-ups depends a lot on the support that they are paired with. Robin is an attack scaling follow-up attack buffer, and while neither of them scale off of attack, Aventurine launches follow-ups while Little Ika doesn't count as one. Meanwhile, Tribbie is a universal buffer that favors Hyacine a lot more due to their specific synergy, so in this scenario, Hyacine will perform much better when paired with her. And I guess that's a perfect segue to talk about Tribbie, I guess. Tribbie and Hyacine buff each other in a two-way street. Obviously, Tribbie buffs Hyacine with her universal buffs and mechanics that work well with AoE hits, and also obviously, Hyacine buffs Tribbie as Tribbie skill skills with HP. But on top of this, Tribbie gains an additional HP buff in her ultimate based on the team's total HP. So not only is Little Ika another HP bar to siphon from, but Hyacine's HP buff also boosts this buff further. So Hyacine is by far the sustain that works the best with Tribbie. Not that this should be the sole decider of how you build your teams around them, but their synergy is undeniable. In this same line of thinking, I'd also place Cipher on this top tier as well, as her vulnerability buff is massive for Hyacine, and Hyacine's personal damage has an extra use in being another source to charge Cipher's damage accumulation, especially since that accumulation is most efficiently charged in an AoE setting. It's not really a surprise to see new units working together, but as I've mentioned before, Cipher, Hyacine, and Tribbie are kind of in this niche of supporting with actual damage, so using them together to have more damaging units on the team that benefit from these team-wide buffs is a pretty good idea. Ruan Mei, Jiaoshu, and Pela have half of that puzzle of providing damage buffs, but without that extra sauce of synergy, so I'll put them a tier below. Other than them, I don't really think I'll be putting any other generic supports on this tier list, as placing them would be rather arbitrary. If you are able to articulate where Bronya or Tingyun should go, then be my guest. But their realms of utility are so separate to where it's more important to consider how they each buff a given carry, rather than how well they work amongst each other. The only other support I'll put here in this context is RMC, with the only notable synergy being Hyacine's 75 energy that she gets on her first skill, which can then insta-charge Mem's first action advance. This is relevant for any team that has the two of them together in, so sure, they go here, why not? The last general group to talk about are units whose main thing they want from the sustain is SP, so really just DHIL and Qingque. Here, while she provides less SP than Gallagher, her personal damage, in my opinion, more than makes up for it. It's worth noting here that due to her easily reaching 200 speed, that she is able to generate 3 SP a cycle, which most sustains barring DDD can't do. So in terms of this specific niche, she comes up in second place, where she can then pull slightly ahead with her personal damage. I still wouldn't put her in the top tier for them, as I'm not sure if I'd call her a quote genuine upgrade, but they do synergize a bit well. It's just that, again, Hyacine actually wants to use SP herself, unlike Gallagher, so there is something being lost when completely playing into this SP generating part of her kit. And this part should go without saying, but when it comes to units who actually were made to use Gallagher, or Linkshot, otherwise known as break units, yeah, Hyacine doesn't really do much for them. Or rather, they are one of the few archetypes that have sustains that are specifically geared towards them. So using Hyacine is just unoptimal and a bit wasteful. Plus, a lot of break carries these days go sustainless anyways, so that makes Hyacine even less relevant. Okay, now we can finally talk about specific use cases with carries. First off, let's talk about the units who benefit from her frequent attacks, mainly the Herta and Feixiao. For both of them, it really depends. Let me explain. For Feixiao, how well Hyacine compares to Aventurine is entirely enemy dependent. More attacks from the enemies benefit both Aventurine and Hyacine, as Hyacine getting hit by enemies both gives her energy, which then means more Ika hits, and more damage through Ika getting more chances to heal. While for Aventurine, obviously enemies hitting the team is the main way that he does his follow-ups in the first place. So in a fight without frequent follow-up attacks, Hyacine by default will do better, but in fights like Hule, Aventurine will for sure pull ahead. Especially due to, firstly, his attack being a bounce attack so it doesn't lose any damage with less enemies, and also due to the aforementioned favoring with Robin towards Aventurine's follow-ups. Oh yeah, I guess that means I should actually put Robin somewhere, here. Higher than average frequency of attacks are good for Robin's energy and additional damage, and Robin does provide 50 damage percent to the whole team, so it's not like Hyacine gets nothing. Sure, moving on. There is also the question for Linkshot here, where I also think Hyacine will do about even with most of the time. Linkshot does provide better stack generation with optimal Fuyu on play, especially since Hyacine's skill isn't an attack, while Linkshot's is. So in achieving higher uptime with Hyacine's ult, you aren't basicking, which lets Linkshot easily pull ahead. This is evened out by Hyacine having better damage, but also, again, if the enemy attacks enough to make Hyacine's energy a non-issue, then she won't need to skill much in the first place. I'd say that for all these Feixiao teams, Hyacine isn't really positioned well to be buffed by the team for her damage, so while I would still expect her to be slightly better than Linkshot, and maybe better than Aventurine depending on the fight, it obviously won't be her best showing. Also, to briefly mention the sub DPSs, again, Ika does not count as a follow-up attack, so there is no special synergy with Topaz. Hunt March's synergies all lie with her skill recipient, so Hyacine does nothing special, but Hyacine can charge Moze in the same manner as Aventurine or Linkshot, so we are back to square one. For the Herta, in comparison to Linkshot, Hyacine again provides overall less attacks, but a good bit more damage. damage. But the mileage that you get out of this damage is so team dependent on the team comp that she is used in. In a team like the Herta, Sunday, Jade, Hyacine is getting nothing from the team outside of the base 80% crit damage from the Herta, which, don't get me wrong, that is a very strong starting point. But comparing a team like that to, say, the Herta, Anaxa, Tribbie, and Hyacine, and now we get all of Tribbie's buffs, Anaxa's damage bonus, and the aforementioned extra damage that Hyacine gives to Tribbie. So suffice to say, your mileage will vary a lot, and specifically in that first team comp, I would expect Linkshot or Ho-Ho to do generally better, but in the latter team comp, Hyacine can really shine. I'd also say that your mileage can somewhat depend on if you have the Herta's Lycone. As in a comp like this, SP is pretty tight to go around, to say the least. And if anyone is going to take up the mantle to be an SP generator for the team first, it's going to be Hyacine. A plug here to subscribe. This video is kind of long, so I'll make this short. I have a lot of returning viewers compared to my actual sub count, so if you want to be one of the cool ones that makes that funny number go up, then check to see if you're actually subbed. Alright, back to the vid. Now, the moment you've all been waiting for, actually talking about more units that are genuinely upgraded by Hyacine. Starting with Acheron! Yeah, this is where we get to a more specific use case, but it turns out that Hyacine's Lycone actually applies a debuff whenever the Memory Spy attacks, which for Hyacine turns out to be quite often. So that, combined with her personal damage, makes her basically Acheron's best sustain at E0S1. At E0S0, she really does nothing special for her, and if you have a non-E2 Acheron and are looking for more of an upgrade, I would say that Cipher would be a better investment option for her to be used alongside the Jiaoxu that you presumably have, but if you want to give your Acheron her best possible team, well, here's another outlet to do so. It also feels appropriate to mention here that Ratio can also benefit from this Lycone debuff, although the quantity of debuffs is still less than a Gallagher or E0S1 Aventurine, so I wouldn't say that their synergy is noteworthy. Anyways, let's talk about the HP scalers. Enough meandering to get to her, let's talk about Castorice. So if you want the TLDR for Castorice and Hyacine, then yeah, Hyacine is a pretty damn good upgrade for her, for a few reasons. First, there are the surface level reasons. Hyacine buffs the team's HP. That means that not only will Castorice be doing more damage, but she will also have more HP to drain from her teammates with her skill. It also means that her skill's drain procs Ika's heal to give more charge. Little Ika existing also gives Cass another HP bar to drain from, which then also means AoE hits from the enemy will give more charge from more HP from the team being lost. The 20% all-type red pen field from the dragon can boost Ika's damage so long as you plan out Ika's actions correctly before you explode the dragon. And unlike Luocha and Gallagher, Hyacine's healing has no downtime. You don't have to play around specific cooldowns to have burst windows of healing. Instead, every Hyacine turn can provide ample charge or dragon healing, and every enemy attack will give extra charge through Ika's responsive heal. But with all of that, Gallagher can still charge more. I mean, look, if you Gallagher skill into Gallagher ult, into Tribbie follow-up, into RMC ult, into another Tribbie follow-up, into Tribbie ult, into Gallagher enhanced basic, onto 5 enemies that have the Basad state on them, that's just an absurd amount of charge that can't be beat. When Gallagher can consistently have the Basad debuff onto 5 enemies, he wins in charging. Obviously, Hyacine still wins in damage buffing no matter what by far, but if that extra charging results in an extra exploding dragon or two, then that extra damage from Hyacine matters a lot less. Hyacine's real strength here is that for many situations, Gallagher can't have 5 enemies consistently in a Basad debuff. Since the aim of the game Honkai Star Rail is to, well, kill the enemies, it's almost never gonna happen where Gallagher can just infinitely funnel Castorice. In pure fiction, his debuff uptime is really shaky, as minus the primary enemy of the second and third wave, every other enemy won't be alive for long enough to have the full duration of the Basad debuff be actually helpful. The same principle goes for enemies with AoE adds, like Flame Reaver or the Big Bug. I don't know, I'm too lazy to look up the name. The comparison I've come to is that Hyacine is to Castorice as Anaxa is to the Herta. Yes, the extra damage is completely uncontested, but the real value in pulling them is making your powerful carry more universally applicable. Because of Castorice's bounce attack with her dragon, she can be really good in AoE and single target fights, but her optimal supports so far have really funneled her optimal usage to be just an AoE. Now, Hyacine still prefers AoE fights for herself because of Ika's AoE hits, but in terms of supporting Castorice, compared to Gallagher, things are much more freeform. It's also worth noting that replacing Gallagher makes Tribbie a lot less needed to perform optimally, as the charging that you get from her follow-ups is entirely gone. Tribbie is still of course the best in slot alongside RMC, especially with how well she works with Hyacine, but I do just want to note that she is a bit more replaceable here. If you want my personal opinion, which surprise, that's what what this whole video is, I would recommend looking at this in the same way that I did when I first got Castorice. By that point, Hyacine's pre-release cycle had not finished, so I decided on whether or not to get Hyacine based on how much I liked using Gallagher. I personally decided that I really liked Gallagher with Castorice, which is why I'll be skipping Hyacine, alongside a poll on my Discord that I rigged by voting in it as the deciding vote. But if you're not like me and you have been unsatisfied by Gallagher, then Hyacine will for sure be a very tangible improvement for you. And if we are comparing her to Luocha, then yeah, she is better in every situation by far. Gallagher has higher highs in charging and lower lows combined with a lack of buffs, but Luocha has a mid rate of charging that is also combined with a lack of buffs, so he just loses here by default. I want to reiterate that in my opinion, Hyacine is not some sort of must pull for Castorice, but she is a very strong vertical investment option if that's what you're looking for. Now for Mydei, Hyacine is clearly his best sustain, like by far, but there isn't exactly that special sauce that makes her actually worth it sincerely as the vertical investment option to go for him. The main things that she provides over the likes of Luocha is her personal damage and the extra HP. Now, would an E1 Tribbie over an E0 Tribbie do more than this for an account overall, including Mydei? Yeah, probably. Now, Mydei does benefit from ample healing, since his HP consumption is based on his current HP, so if he's closer to his max HP, he'll get more charge. So it's not quite as much of a snooze fest as, oh, she provides a buff that other sustains don't, but it's like 80% like that. Like with the other buffed units, I'm not sure how much I want to talk about Blade, since he's going to be changed in some amount one patch from now. But for now, he's in that same exact situation as Mydei, except for the fact that the 1% HP drain from her signature is that real secret sauce. So like Acheron, E0S1 is the main goal to go for if you're pulling Hyacine only for Blade, but the good news is that assuming the character buffs will be in the 3.4 pre-release cycle, we'll know roughly how Blade's update will work during Hyacine's banner. So for now, she's good with him, maybe she'll be a lot better or a lot worse in like 2 months, and for that I can't really have any solid opinions. Next, I'll use Sunday to talk about using Hyacine as a main DPS, where in a team like her, Sunday, Tribbie, and RMC, Cipher, or Robin, she can be a somewhat decent pure fiction carry, if your main goal is to turn little Ika into the tactical nuke that he was always meant to be. It's a pretty expensive team, but I'd say it's a pretty common problem for accounts to not have proper pure fiction carries to clear with, so while I wouldn't recommend Hyacine for that role, she is pretty usable from what I've seen. And lastly, for the bottom of the tier list, we have units where it's genuinely probably a better idea to run Hyacine as a carry instead, and at the very bottom, there's Yanqing, where not only does he suck with healers, but her signature also genuinely makes him unable to function. Yeah, you've heard of vertical investment, but I guess now you don't know if that means going up or down. And on that note, that's the list. It's pretty hard to articulate how a sustain can impact a team, since for most carries it depends on the rest of the team, the enemy, or the investment level, but it's nice that for most carries Hyacine has a genuine use case, even if there is some sort of a trade-off in replacing the likes of Ho-Ho or Aventurine. Look out for my Hyacine guide that should be out on the day of the 3.3 livestream, and until then, I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Bye!
I got some jelly beans. You like jelly beans?